We were told that the world has rules. We were lied to. Today, the scaffolding of global order is collapsing. Sovereignty is rising, cooperation is fragmenting, and power is rising. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe the liberal world order designed post-World War II was never meant to last beyond a certain window. So today, we're asking the question that nobody really seems to want to answer. Who rules the world when nations refuse to obey the rules? It's easy to believe that the nation-state has always existed. Flags, borders, governments, these feel so permanent, but the reality is much more complicated. Before the birth of the modern nation-state, empires dominated. Territories weren't lines on a map, but they were spheres of influence. That began to change in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War and introduced the radical concept of sovereignty. States became political units with exclusive control over what happened in their territory. Long before the Westphalian system, Bharat, or what we now call India, existed not as a nation-state but as a civilization state. This can be seen in the Maurya Empire, which extended through Buddhist diplomacy to Southeast Asia, to Central Asia, Sri Lanka. This can also be seen in the Gupta Empire, which fostered a golden age of mathematics, introducing zero and the decimal system, astronomy, philosophy. India's sovereignty was civilizational, not territorial. It spread its influence through cultural continuity, not through armies or a map. Throughout history, we have had global policemen, the world hegemon, the leading global power. This can be seen in China, from the Han Dynasty to the Ming. China built a tributary structure, stretching from Korea to Vietnam to Central Asia. States didn't have to be annexed. They paid tribute, received titles, and recognized the emperor's supremacy. This can also be seen through Pax Mongolica. The Mongol Empire stitched together Eurasia with unmatched speed and brutality. From Korea to Hungary, it unified fractured zones through the YAM system, which was a communication and logistics network, through religious tolerance for strategic reasons, and through a single trade zone like the Silk Road. Security was guaranteed in exchange for subordinates. Then we get to the imperial blueprint, Pax Romana, Rome. Rome gave us the first scalable model of an empire, based on law and infrastructure. Citizenship was offered as a tool of assimilation and integration. We can see this in the story of the rape of the Sabine women, which was written by Livy in the History of Rome. I think it was chapter 9 of book 1. So the women were abducted and were given Roman citizenship as a step towards their integration to Roman society, and this allowed Rome to expand to neighbouring cities. But Rome didn't just occupy, they actually governed. They made sure that their idea of civilization was placed as the norm and everything else as barbarism. And then we had the big one, the British Empire, Pax Britannica. From 1815 to 1914, Britain ruled over 400 million people, occupying nearly a quarter of the Earth's surface. Its imperial logic was naval supremacy through the Royal Navy, financial supremacy through the City of London, and information infrastructure through telegrams. But as imperialism supposedly became a thing of the past and empires began to fray, there was a new convention, the Montevideo Convention, agreed in 1933, which set about trying to define what is actually a state. They came up with 4 criteria: a defined territory, a permanent population, a government, and the ability to enter into relations with other states. But theory doesn't always meet reality. We have Taiwan, which meets all 4 criteria, but China denies its existence. We have Kosovo, which is recognized by most of the West, but Russia denies its existence too. Montevideo implies that statehood is legal, but in reality, it's geopolitical. Realists have always understood this. Sovereignty isn't sacred. States impede it all of the time. In this era especially, it seems that the checklist matters less than the alliances you have to actually back it up. Disillusionment is spreading, not only amongst the politicians, but also amongst the electorate who vote them in. Sean thinks that international organisations are increasingly weakening as a result of the wider backlash to globalisation and integration, and he talks about Brexit and the rise of Trump as a symptom of the much deeper trend. And he also says that it seems to be a negative feedback loop, especially with the perception of globalization and the immigration which comes with it, leading to greater job competition, as we were seeing with America and Mexico and with the UK and the EU. And politicians like Trump, like, the rise of UKIP, pro-Brexiteers, started tapping into these sentiments and making them core pillars of their campaign platforms. If you agree or disagree, do let us know. I think that this is a really interesting and probably quite accurate take on things, that all of these things are tapping into, feeding into the disillusionment people have with this, with the increased globalization that we're seeing in the world. And I think that we are starting to see states step back from international organizations, from things like the UN, like the World Trade Organization, which is currently, in a gridlock. But you may disagree with everything that I'm saying, and you can let us know on the Substack at stateofthedebate.substack.com, or you can let us know down in the comment section below. International law as a framework was born out of optimism. After World War II, states came together to try to come up with a system that would prevent further bloodshed. This led to the UN Charter, the Geneva Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Criminal Court, and the International Court of Justice. But optimism doesn't always equal actual enforcement. International law lacks a central executive. There's no police force. States are in international anarchy, and it depends on voluntary compliance. We say voluntary, it's often coercive. It's been 30 years last week since the massacre at Srebrenica, where over 8,000 Bosnian men and boys were slaughtered, despite the town being designated as a UN safe zone. Eventually, justice did come. The International Criminal Tribunal in the former Yugoslavia did convict key figures. For a moment, it did seem that international law had teeth, that the never again in the post-Cold War world actually meant something. But it now feels like something extraordinary, not a new normal. There have been cases in Iraq, in Libya, in Ukraine. In 2002, when the ICC was founded, since then they've arrested over 45 arrest warrants, predominantly targeting African leaders, which means that the African Union keeps on threatening to pull out due to alleged bias. No permanent members of the UN Security Council have ever faced a trial. The ICC is also not even ratified by the US, by China, by India, and by Russia, which are 4 of the 5 biggest states. Justice, it seems, does not transcend power. It actually obeys it. And it seems that international law isn't actually real law. But the only law that does seem to be pushed forward is human rights law, defending illegal immigrants who aren't able to be deported. For example, in 2025, we had the case of an Albanian criminal in the UK who wasn't able to be deported because his son couldn't have anything other than British chicken nuggets. He couldn't have the chicken nuggets from anywhere else, and deporting him would be unduly harsh on his son. I wish I could say that was a joke. It's not a joke, it's very real. For many people, these cases are proof that international law no longer commands respect. And now we move on to the United Nations, the big beast of international organizations created in order to prevent another global conflict where the League of Nations so miserably failed. But it seems that the United Nations was actually created as a flawed institution. You see, there are 2 parts of the United Nations predominantly. You have the General Assembly, which is where every single nation has the same voice, the same vote. And then you have the Security Council, which represents the true face of global power politics. There are 5 permanent nations, and each of them have a veto. One no can block the will of 190 other countries. These 5 nations are the USA, China, France, the UK, and Russia. As you can see, it represents the powers of the post-World War II order. Times have changed, and the United Nations doesn't seem to have reflected that. Countries like India, with 1.4 billion people and is now the 4th largest economy in the world, does not have a seat on the United Nations Security Council. Countries like Brazil, Indonesia, all regional growing powers, also don't have a seat and don't have a say. But maybe the UN isn't broken. It's perfectly designed to preserve the powers of the post-World War II order. But it seems that other countries don't want to partake in that farce anymore. Other countries want to break free of the shackles of the post-World War II order and want to explore something different. They want to take control of their own sovereignty in their own hands. They don't want it to be pulled anymore. They want to choose their own alliances. They want to choose their own borders. And they won't let the UN dictate to them anymore. Money is influence, and for the last 80 years, that influence has belonged to the USA. We're going to be talking about our most requested topic, which is de-dollarization. Through the Bretton Woods system, which is essentially another form of international governance, you have the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. The US dollar was the world's reserve currency. But the dollar's dominance wasn't just economic, it was also political. Sanctions became a tool of diplomacy. You had countries which didn't align with the US interests, like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, locked out of global banking. But all of that seems to be changing. In the year 2000, the dollar accounted for over 70% of global trade. Now, in 2025, it's less than 60%. And BRICS nations, which we're going to be talking about a bit later, are leading the shift. You have India paying for UAE oil using rupees. You have Saudi Arabia signing energy deals using the yuan. Central banks are stockpiling gold instead of dollars. Even trust in the Fed is waning. And now we have BRICS. BRICS started off as an investment acronym and now is a geopolitical force. It consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and is now including countries like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, with countries like Argentina and Indonesia currently in talks. So now it's essentially become BRICS Plus. Together, BRICS Plus controls over 40% of global GDP in PPP terms, more than 53% of global gas reserves, nearly 50% of the world population, and an increasing share of international trade in local currency, not in US dollars. In 2025, the Rio Declaration was issued, condemning the weaponization of finance, calling for UN reform and Security Council expansion, enforcing de-dollarization and new development frameworks. But BRICS is messy. India and China dispute over borders, Iran and Saudi Arabia have strained historical relations, you have South Africa managing internal volatility. But BRICS doesn't need ideological unity, it needs shared dissent. And that dissent is strong. This is more than an economic organization, it's an organization that wants to create new rules. So now, are we seeing the rise of multipolarity? In international relations theory, multipolarity is the idea that there are multiple powers. There's no hegemon, there's no leader, there's no global enforcer. Realists warn that multipolarity breeds instability. You have more actors, so there's more mistrust. You have a lack of coordination, so there's more chance of miscalculation. History suggests that when multipolarity collapses, there is war. Think of pre-World War I Europe. You had so many competing empires, ambitions, alliances, The British Empire was declining and there was no hegemon to replace it, so chaos ensued. Liberal theorists argue that institutions can prevent this from happening, but as we've been discussing, it doesn't seem that these institutions are actually able to prevent the start of a new revolution where the existing world order is being challenged. And multipolarity is rising, yes, but at what cost? I was asked, what do you think the future of the world will look like? I think that we're entering a world of spheres of influence again, not rules, where China shapes Asia through trade and through coercion, where BRICS Plus offers alternative finance for the global south, where countries like Russia, Turkey, Iran and India carve influence through proximity, through strategy, energy and leverage. The old order is dying. New actors are rising, not as idealists, but as realists. They're not trying to fix the old system, they're trying to build a new one. Welcome to the world after cooperation. If you disagree or agree with anything that I've said, do make sure to let us know down in the comment section below, or you can join our Substack at stateofthedebate.substack.com. We've recently opened up our chat, so now you can, in real time, talk to fellow debaters and subscribers to our community. Make sure that you have subscribed and you've clicked that bell notification if you're watching on YouTube. You've shared this episode if you find it useful. Do let us know what topics you want us to cover in shorts or in future episodes. Do also make sure to send in videos if you want us to do a reaction series. Do let us know what you want us to do. This is not just my microphone, it's also yours. Thank you so much for watching this episode and I hope to see you soon. In the meantime, I shall see you again.